Good evening. Under lesson two, actually, I need to discuss about the research methodology, especially including the qualitative and the quantitative studies. Last week we started this lesson, started with the assumptions in the scientific research. We discussed them in last week class, and we discussed a few methods as well. So since no one is here, I don't know whether you understood or not. So I don't worry about it as no one is here today. So anyways, I will continue it as I don't have enough time to reschedule it. The systematic and empirical studies can be done. So we discussed them last week, and the limitations of the scientific method. So that is what we should start with. When we are dealing with the science, right? So when it comes to scientific method, the limitation means we always deal with especially when we deal with physics and chemistry and biological science or something. In this type of field, we follow some fixed laws, right? Gravity related laws and other laws. We deal with some fixed laws. So the thing is, when we apply those fixed laws in human behaviors and the human performances, there are some cases which are not practical, right? Practically, we can't implement, or practically we can't use the same thing in each and every scenarios, right? Because of having the differences in human behaviors and human performance, right? So most of the time, different things will be little bit complicated when it comes to the practical situation, although we are applying the fixed laws, right? Although we are applying the gravity related laws, right? Although the gravity always works in same way, when we apply in that law in different situations, the things will become little bit complicated. And on the other hand, as we are dealing with human beings most of the time when we conduct research, right? That may be a physical science research, that may be a biological science research, that may be a, let's say, a social science research, that may be a art related research, right? So whatever the research we are doing, there are some aspect which we need to engage with the people, right? So people means those are unpredictable um, things. We can't predict their behaviors, we can't predict their performances, right? We can't predict anything when it comes to human behavior and the performance, right? So, for an example, uh, give me a minute. Okay, so for an example, although we are dealing with the same situation, as per our workload, as per our personal motivation, as per the physical attitudes or the personal attitudes we have, as per different capacity we have, as per different factors like stress and the motivational factors and so on, our outcome will be differ from one person to another, although we are dealing with the same situation. Same thing happen when it comes to research studies. So that is one of the limitation we have, right? And another thing is the research, when we conduct the research studies, as we are dealing with the nature, it is a high complex situation, right? There are some situations we can't predict the nature, right? There are some situations we can't, we had to face with uncertain situations and some random situations because we are dealing with natural processes. So when we are dealing with natural processes, we have to bias, we have to deal with uncertain, unpredictable situations. So that means it is really difficult to identify the exact outcome, exact results. Even we can't predict the results for a considerable level when we are dealing with the nature, right? And as same as I earlier explained you, so as we are dealing with the human bodies, most of the time when we are dealing with the people, their mindset, their attitudes, their capabilities, their capacity, their biological aspects, their psychological aspects, everything are different from one person to another. So although we are having some scientific aspects, scientific theories, although we are having some, let's say, biology related theories or concepts, when we apply them, right? When we apply them and when we are trying to find some scientific finding through a research study, when we try to apply them to everyone in the society, it will be little bit complicated. Because person to person, their emotions, their experiences, their capabilities, everything will be different from person to person. So dealing with those people is really difficult and getting a good outcome, right? Although we are having a good plan, sometimes we can't get that exact outcome at the end of the research since we are dealing with human bodies, and practically when we are applying the scientific knowledge to the people, we can't get the exact outcome at the end of the day, right? So although we have some predicted outcomes, we can't, it is really difficult to get that prediction at the end of the study since we are dealing with people most of the time when we conduct a research, right? So that may be, in a research study, sometimes you have to interview them. You have to have one-to-one discussions. You have to conduct online surveys. You can conduct um, the focus group discussions, or else you can conduct experiment observational studies while having a look on the persons who are working, right? So in different ways you are assessing the people, right? In different angles you are assessing them. So it is really complicated and it is really difficult for us to assess their behaviors and their emotions and their beliefs as well, right? Especially in medical sciences, medicine related studies, it is really difficult to identify uh, the causes, right? The side effects, it is really difficult to identify the side effects because from person to person, the side effects of a particular, the medicine will be different, right? Due to having some genetic differences, due to having some immunity issues or something, the side effects the impact of that particular medicine will be different from one person to another person. So it is a really complicated situation, right? And same thing happen when it comes to social science research. So when we are dealing with, so especially in the social science research studies, we always study the human beings, their attitudes. We study the society, right? We study the culture, we study the environmental study side, we study the society, right? So at the end of the day, we are trying to study the human bodies and identify some factors, some external factors we are going to understand through the social sciences related research studies. So in that case also, the researchers should be very careful when they analyze the data, because since they are dealing with the human bodies and their behavior, sometimes we can't gather the exact results, exact data, accurate data from the human bodies. Although you are developing a really good questionnaire, right? Sometimes your participants will not correctly fill it. Sometimes your participants will not correctly give you the answers due to having some personal issues or some trust issues or some behavioral issues. They will not fill it out correctly. So because of that, your research and your findings will go here and there due to having that issue. And the analytical part is also really difficult when it comes to social study, because you are dealing with people and you can't assume that your participant will give you the 100% correct answers for your questionnaire, even though in the interviews, one-to-one or in the online surveys. So those are few limitations we have. And also in the physical sciences studies, right, we do some experimental studies, and we do some laboratory test, right? As engineers, you have to do some laboratory test. You have to assess many more variables as well, right? In different angles, you are assessing variables, right? In controllable situations, you control different factors, and you do some experiments in lab, right? So to get some good outcomes, to identify different factors affecting a system or a machine or a method, you assess different factors in controllable situations. So it is also a really difficult situations, because we are dealing with theories, right? Theoretical aspect is there, and most of the time we bias on the assumptions, because we are dealing with mathematics and statistics. When we analyze the data, when we collect the data, when we interpret the results, we bias on the assumptions. We do have assumptions, right? Sometimes we round off the data. Sometimes we can't collect the 100% correct data. When we collect the data, sometimes we can't collect 100% correct data. And there are some cases, let's say we need to have 1,000 number of data, but we receive only 850 data. So because of that, we can't get the exact outcome. So having few assumptions, we can complete our study. So because of having that assumptions, our findings may be differ from the initial, our predicted outcome, right? So, and another thing is, in the engineering field, you are dealing with more calculations now. Your materials have some variability, right? So you are using different materials, right? So due to having some natural defects or some environmental effects, so in your materials as well, the variability can be there. So those are some limitations when we practically do a research, right? So product quality, quality related issues can be there, right? Sometimes the processes are not 100% perfect, although we are having a 100% perfect plan. When we practically implement it, our manufacturing process may be that will not be go up to 100% perfect level, right? Due to having product quality issues, or maybe having some variability in our materials that we are using in our manufacturing process, right? So, and most of the time, the physical sciences related research studies, we deal with some scientific theories, right? We always try to balance the scientific accuracy with the practicality. So it is really hard, right? It is really hard to balance that scientific accuracy when it comes to practicality, right? Especially when we are dealing with the engineering related research studies. And another limitation is the ethical issues, right? It is not only in the engineering side, but also in medical sciences, especially in the medical sciences, right? Since they are directly dealing with the human lives and the human bodies, the ethical aspects is there. Same thing happen when it comes to social sciences and the physical sciences. You also deal with the human body. You are introducing machines to the human bodies. You are introducing new methods to the society, community. You are developing buildings to the community. So you should consider the ethical issues as well, safety of the people, the impact that happen on the people and the community and the environment at large, right? You should think about the environmental factors when you design the solution, when you design the machine, when you design the methods, right? Through the research studies, most of the time the engineering related or physical sciences related researchers, they are doing some developments, no, development related research, right? That may be a machine, that may be a method, right? That may be a new concept. So in either way, you should protect the ethics. You should stick to the ethics. You should protect the safety of the people. You should protect your community. You should protect your environment at large, right? And also you should protect the scientific knowledge as well, right? Not only the people, not only the environment, the scientific knowledge as well, you should protect it. That is ethics. When you, you know, conduct research, we will be having a separate lesson for research ethics as well. So I'm not going to discuss more about the research ethics here. So those are few limitations we have when we conduct a research study, right? Then moving on to the research design and the research method. I think we didn't discuss this one, right? Did we discuss this part last week? Okay. So here, moving on to the research designing and research methods. So what we are going to discuss is we are following a good process here, right? So although we are under research design and research methods, we follow a very logical order, right? So first what you have to do is you have to identify a research problem, right? So that is what actually we are discussing from lesson 1 as well, right? So we have to identify the research problem, right? That is the first step. You have to clearly define the problem, or you have to clearly define the research question, right? The research aim as well, that you are going to answer at the end of your research study. And you should be able to design your research objectives, and your research objectives and research problem must be a specific one, and it should be a reachable one, it should be a measurable one. Likewise, first of all, you should identify your research problem, and then what you have to do is you should set up the research specific research objectives that link with your research aim, right? So I mean, you should define specific research objectives in order to achieve the big research aim through your research, right? A concise, very clear, specific, more manageable objectives should be defined, that should be linked with your research title, research area, and especially with your research aim. To address your big aim, you should break down it into more manageable part under research objectives. Then what you have to do is you have to choose the research methodology. What is the methodology you are going to use? That is the third step. You have to determine the most important deliverable, the research methodology you are going to use. Right? So you can decide whether you are going to use a quantitative research, or whether you are going to conduct a qualitative research, or whether you are going to conduct a mixed method or something, right? So we will discuss about these two later, quantitative and the qualitative studies, right? So if I give you a basic idea, quantitative studies, we deal with the numerical values, we conduct experiments and the statistical analysis, and we deal with more numerical values, numerical data under quantitative research. And qualitative one is a very descriptive one. We don't deal with numbers, right? Numerical data. We use numbers only to categorize the data, right? But we don't deal much with the numerical values as the quantitative research when it comes to the qualitative research. So, other than that, you can combine those two and conduct a mixed method as well, right? So initially you can start with the qualitative research, and then later on you can adapt some quantitative aspects as well to add more credibility, add more value to your study. So most of the time, I would say 90% of the physical science related students, they do quantitative research, not the qualitative one, right? Most of the physical science, right? Almost all, I would say almost all of the physical science students, they do quantitative research studies than the qualitative one, or else they start with qualitative and then combine it to the quantitative one. Like mixed methods they can use. I mean, the qualitative one, very rarely they use. Most of the time, quantitative or else the mixed methods are used. Right? Then what you have to do is you have to select the data collection method as well. It is based on the methods, the research method you have selected. You can select the data collection method as well. That means how you are going to collect the data. So, if you can use a survey studies, that you can conduct an online survey, a questionnaire can be distributed, physical hard copies can be distributed, or online questionnaires can be distributed through a Google form or something. Online platforms can be used, right? To collect conduct the market research, to collect the perception of the individuals, to identify the community's opinions or something. You can conduct surveys and the questionnaires. And then the experiments can be done, right? You can test the materials. You can conduct some lab experiments as well. You can study, the chemical reactions, and you can assess the product performance as well in the lab test, right? Most of the physical science related experiments, you can conduct lab tests to assess the product performance, and you can even test the materials, and the materials you are using in your production, you can assess as an experiment. And the focus group discussions can be done. So that is also data collection methods. I mean, when we are conducting human related studies, so we can conduct interviews, one-to-one interviews, or focus group discussions can be done. That is also a good method to collect data, right, for the human related studies. And other than that, the observational studies can be done to, especially to study the behavioral aspects or behavioral and performance analysis. We can conduct the observational studies, and the case study analysis can be done. So we can identify the data collection method as well. And then what you have to do is you have to develop a sampling strategy, right? So we will discuss about the sampling techniques as well here through this lesson. You have to identify from whom you are going to collect your data, right? So before moving to the sampling strategy, you have selected the the data collection methods. So now you have to determine from whom you are going to collect the data. And you have to determine, okay, what is the sample size you are going to collect the data, right? Through that selected methods, from whom you are going to collect the data, and what about the sample size? From, let's say, from 150 persons, or with the from 200 persons, or with the from 500 persons, or whatever the persons, whatever the number it is, from whom, and what about the sample size you are going to assess? So that depends on the population you have. First of all, right, before you define the sample and the sample size, you should know the exact population, right? Exact population should understand first, and then you can use any sampling technique, or there are some pre-develop some theoretical things as well. There are some tables as well, Kohlmorgen's table or something. You can refer anything, and you have to select a sample, adequate sample out of the population, right? Otherwise, you can't get the exact outcome. Let's say you have, imagine in your population, you have 1,000 employees, and you don't refer to any sampling technique. You just take 10 employees and give a questionnaire and collect the data and analyze. You can't get the exact outcome as you plan, right? You can't even achieve at least one of your objective, right? If you have 1,000 employees in your population, you should use a proper sampling technique, and you should identify the adequate sample size in order to understand, or in order to collect and analyze the data. So under sampling methods, actually, we can use random sampling, stratified sampling, right? Purposive sampling. Likewise, we have different sampling techniques as well. We will discuss them. The probabilistic sampling and non-probabilistic sampling techniques are there. So as per the requirements and the convenience, right? As per the convenience, we can select any sampling technique in order to identify the sample size. Then what you have to do is you have to now you have identified the percent you are going to assess and the sample size, and you know the method you are going to use, right? So imagine you have collected the data through that data collection method, and then what is the problem is the data analysis technique, right? The data analysis technique, right? How you are going to interpret the data, how you are going to analyze the data, right? Whether you are going to use a statistical analysis, or whether you are going to use a comparative analysis, or whether you are going to conduct a thematic analysis. Likewise, you have to understand the data analysis technique you are going to use. Right, so you can use the statistical analysis as well, right? You can assess the correlation if you are going to use analyze the interaction between different factors, or if you are going to assess the relationship between different factors, let's say dependent and independent variables, you can conduct a regression analysis, and correlation coefficient analysis can be conducted, right? You can assess the standard deviation to analyze the spread of the data. You can even analyze the mean of the data set. So the statistical analysis can be done. I'm just stating few examples. You can go beyond of that. And comparative analysis can be done. You can compare different group, right? Under different conditions, you can study different groups as well. So comparative analysis can be done under analytical thought. And if you are using qualitative data, let's say you are having qualitative data, so then you can conduct a thematic analysis as well. If you are having qualitative data, you can conduct a thematic analysis. So you should identify the data analytic techniques you are going to use. And so when you conduct these steps, you should consider the ethical considerations as well, right? You should assess the risk as well, and you should have a proper plan for your study. So now you know the way of starting your research, and you have to have a very good workflow diagram for your study, starting from the topic identification, research problem identification, to the endpoint, right? To the data collection, data analysis part, and the end point or ethical consideration part. And you should ensure that there are no any bias when you conduct the research, and you should be able to ensure that there are no any manipulations in your research studies, because it is comes under research ethic, right? Ethical aspects. And if you are using individuals, persons, right? Confidentiality should be there. You should protect the data and the accuracy and the privacy. Everything should be confidential, right? The data should be confidential. So as a researcher, you should, assure that confidentiality and the privacy of your participants, right? And you should have that proper plan for your study and the workflow for your study. And also you should assess the risk factor. You should conduct a risk analysis and the feasibility study as well when you are studying starting your research. So then you know how to avoid those issues when you start your research, right? So that is how actually we design our research method and the research design. So moving on to the key characteristics of the research method. So these four are the main key characteristics. We can identify these four: neutrality, reliability, validity, and the generalization. Those are the main key characteristics of the research methods. So first one is neutrality. Neutrality means the results projected in the research design should be free from bias and neutral. So what is mean by that? Neutrality. So in any research study, it is really important to have this neutrality, right? So that means the results or as the findings of your study, they should not be influenced by the persons or let's say the researchers' personal opinions, personal beliefs, personal preferences, right? Personal bias. It should not be influences by the researchers' personal things. That is the neutrality. It should free from the personal bias, right? It is a good characteristic of a research method, right? And then the second one is reliability, right? Reliability means the research design should indicate how to form the research question to ensure the consistency of the results. So it is all about the consistency of the results. Reliability means it is consistency of the results. So your research, a reliable research design always help you to ensure that your study, if your study is repeated under the same condition, you can produce the similar results. That is the reliability. That is how consistent your research design is, right? If you're having a reliable research design, that means if you test it in different, if you test it in same conditions, right, in different time, in same condition, if you test it, you can get the similar type of results at the end of the studies. That is the reliability. That is the consistency of the research design, if it is reliable, right? So if it is about how dependable and also how trustworthy your research method is, right, to obtain the results that can be repeated time to time, how reliable, how trustworthy, how dependable it is. And the third one is validity. Validity means even though there are multiple measuring tools, the tool shall help the researcher in gagging the results according to the objectives of the research. So validity means um, validity means um, There are many more tools to measure the results of the research. So it means that the tools or methods that used in the research studies truly capture the information which relevant to the research objectives. It doesn't matter the tool or measuring tool, whatever the measuring tools you are using, it should address your research objectives. Right? For an example, if you are studying the student performance, the test you use should truly assess their academic skills, academic abilities, and not something unrelated like their handwriting skills or something. Your measuring tool should assess their academic abilities, not the other abilities. Right? That is the validity. Right? That is the validity of your research method. And the generalization means the outcome of this research should be applicable to the population with similar accuracy. So generalization means how well your research findings can be applied to a large population, because when we conduct a research study, we use a small sample. We take a small sample out of the whole population, and we assume that the selected sample represent the characteristics of the population. And with that assumption, while assume that we analyze, we study that selected sample and we come up to a conclusion. So at the end of the study, at the end of your research finding, once you gather your research finding, that finding should be applicable. It should be applicable to the large population. Right, beyond the study sample or small sample, it should be applied to the large population. That is generalization. Your results should be accurate and relevant to make some broader conclusion about the entire population or entire situation similar to the research sample you have used. Right? So that is what we mean by generalization. Although you are using a small sample for your study, it should be applicable for a large situation when it comes to the whole population. Right? For an example, if you study, let's say your study is done on a small group of students in a very small city, so that might, help you to predict how the students in other cities might behave in under similar conditions though. So it should be applicable. It should be applicable for a large population when it comes to the other cities as well. Although you are studying a small set of students in one city, it should be applicable to the other cities as well under similar conditions. That is generalization. So when you are using a research method or when you are conducting a research, that generalization is a really important one. Right? Generalize කරන්න බැරි නම් අපේ research එකකින් වැඩක් නැහැ. Right? අපිට විතරක් use කරන්න පුළුවන් research එකක් තිබිලා community එකටවත් එහෙම නැත්නම් අනිත් researchers ලටවත් ඒක use කරන්න බැරි නම් refer කරන්න බැරි නම් ඒ research එකේ කිසිම value addition එකක් community එකට නැහැ. Right? Those are the main 4 characteristics of the research methods. So moving on to the sampling methods, sampling techniques, I would say. So under sampling methods, there are 2 types. There are 2 types of sampling methods. So first one is probability sampling, and the second one is non-probability sampling. Right? So we can categorize sampling methods into 2 parts: probability sampling and non-probability sampling. Right? So under probability sampling, we can identify different sampling techniques. And again, under non-probability sampling, we can identify different sampling techniques. Right? But the selection of the sampling technique will be depend on your research study. Right? Based on your requirement, you can select either probability sampling or non-probability sampling. You can select as per your requirement in your study. So probability sampling means in probability sampling, every individual in the population has a equal and has a known and has a equal chance of being selected. That is what we assume when it comes to the probability sampling, right? Probability, right? It is a probability. Sambhavitavayak තියෙනවා. So there is an equal chance of being selected when it comes to the probability sampling. When we are here, we are going to select some individuals from the population now, right? We are going to select a small sample out of the population. So every individual in the population has a very equal chance of being selected when it comes to probability sampling. But on the other hand, in non-probability sampling, that is the opposite side of probability sampling. So, probability sampling that is often used when the researcher want to make sure that their sample is very accurate and accurate to represent the large population. They always try to use the probability sampling instead of non-probability sampling. So there are several types of probability sampling like simple random sampling, stratified sampling, right, and cluster sampling. So there are different techniques. So we will discuss them. And the non-probability sampling means, so under non-probability sampling, as I earlier told you, not every individual has the known and not every individual has a equal chance of being selected. That is the difference between these two. So non-probability sampling can be used when the researchers are, not aiming to generalize the results to a large population, or there are some cases where we can't select a probabilistic sampling. We can't apply a probabilistic sampling. So in that case, actually, we can move for the non-probability sampling instead of bias on the probability sampling. So under non-probability sampling also, there are few techniques, right? Judgmental sampling, quota sampling, convenience sampling. So likewise, different sampling techniques are there. So moving on to the first part, that is the probability sampling. So as I earlier told you, the sampling technique uses randomization to make sure that every element of the population gets an equal chance to be part of the selected sample. That is the major thing. So this method is used, to give every individual an equal chance to take place in the sample, right? So, I mean, if a researcher want to accurately represent the entire population, they can go for the probability sampling instead of non-probability sampling. So under probability sampling, we can, I have stated 4 probability sampling techniques: simple random sampling, stratified sampling, systematic sampling, and the cluster sampling, right? So sometimes you may heard these terms. So simple random sampling means that is actually the most basic type of probability sampling, right? Although the stratified, systematic, and cluster sampling are new to you, simple random sampling, maybe you may heard that word at least. So that is the most common and basic type of the probability sampling. So under simple random sampling, what happened is, every individual in the population has an equal chance of being selected. And we, when it comes to simple random sampling, assuming that each one has each and every individual has an equal chance of being selected, it is like drawing the name from a hat. We just simply randomly select in the sample out of the population. So it is like giving the person the same opportunity to be chosen. So every person has the same opportunity to be chosen. It is like we draw the names and we picking up the name from the population while giving them a same opportunity. So this method is a very, great opportunity because we are giving us more, it is practically good and it is practically effective for a smaller population, right? If you are having a big population, I'm not saying like this is not good, good sampling technique, but if you are having a smaller population where every members has an equal chance of being selected, right? If you are having a very small population, this method is quite good than the other methods, right? And then the stratified sampling it is little bit different than the simple random sampling. Under stratified sampling, we divide the population into different subgroup, right? So based on the characteristics, we divide the population into distinct subgroup. For an example, based on the characteristics like age category, gender category, or else the income status and their educational status, so on, different, while studying, while categorizing them into different characteristics of the individual, we divide the population into different subgroups. And then we select a random sample from each and every subgroup. In the simple random sampling, what we do is we randomly select a sample out of the population. We randomly pick a sample from this population, while assuming that every person has an equal chance of being selected. And when it comes to stratified sample, instead of picking one sample from entire population, first of all, we divide the entire population into distinct subgroup while having a look on the characteristics. And then we take a small random sample from each and every subgroups we form. Right? So that is actually what we do under stratified sampling. So then we can ensure that as we are covering each and every characteristic, each and every subgroups here, so we can ensure that all these categories represent the sample, right? So, so high accuracy is there when it comes to stratified sampling because the subgroups who is having different characteristics represent the sample. So that would be effective when it comes to the sampling technique. And the systematic sampling is there. Systematic sampling means in systematic sampling, what you do is you select every nth individual from a list of population, right? In systematic sampling, what you do is you select every nth individual, right? Every nth individual from the list of population. For an example, let's say you are having a list of 1,000 people. So you want to select, let's say you want to select 100, a sample with 100. So you might pick every 10 person on the list, right? You have 1,000 people in your population and out of 100, out of 1,000, you have to select 100. So that 100 is your sample. So under systematic sampling technique, you can pick every 10 person in your list. You can list them out and every 10th person you can select to your sample. That is systematic sampling, right? Not only the 10th, you can select as per your requirement. Let's say you can select 15th person in your list, or else you can select 8th person in your list. So, I mean, that method can be applied when you have some, when you have a very complete list of population, and if you need a simple and very efficient way to select a sample, and if you need to have a proper documentation as well, you can use a systematic sampling. And then we have cluster sampling, that is also comes under probability sampling. So in cluster sampling, what we do is the population is divided into groups, or population can be divided into clusters. Like we mainly focus on the geographical areas, or if it is an organization, the organizational departments we can focus, right? So likewise, we cluster them, we group them out. Not the major characteristics like age and uh, um, the gender and the income or so on. We mainly focus on the geographical areas and the organizational departments or something, and we divide them into groups and clusters, and then we randomly select a sample from each and every cluster. We cluster them out and we select a random sample from each cluster, right? So that is how we select a class. We go for cluster, we do practice cluster sampling. So after that, all the random sample of the individuals within that chosen clusters can be get together, and you can do them a survey, right? You can conduct a survey while referring to those each clustered, each random sample you selected from each and every cluster, right? So that is what we mean by cluster sampling. Then moving on to the non-probability sampling. Non-probability sampling, that is actually we don't use it for randomization. So this non-probability sampling, most of the time we use this non-probability sampling based on the convenience we have. We select the sample based on the convenience. So this method is usually used when the researchers are not focused on making generalization to the entire population, or else when the random sampling is not practical when it comes to their research studies, they move to this non-probability sampling. So under non-probability sampling, again, I have stated few techniques: convenience sampling, purposive sampling, photo sampling, and snowball sampling. Please give me a minute. So, convenience sampling means that is also same as a very simple random sampling. It is also a very common and a very easiest and quickest method under non-probabilistic sampling, right? So, it is, the way of practicing convenience sampling is the researchers, they select the individuals who are easiest to reach and who are most convenient for the researcher. So under convenience sampling, what the researcher do is, when they are going to select the sample, they select the individuals who are easiest for them to reach. Right? For an example, the researchers might survey the people who are very close to them, or else who are, ready to be available anytime, right? Who are convenient for the researchers. So that is what we mean by convenience sampling. So it is really fast method. So no need to worry about selecting, the time, and no need to spend more money, right? No need to spend more effort, right? Put more effort to select a sample. We can select, as a researcher, we can select a convenience people, or the persons, or the individuals who are easiest and who are really easy for us to reach and convenience for us to reach, and select them as the sample. Right, so that is what we do under convenience sampling. It is really fast and it is the most easiest way under non-probability sampling techniques. Right, but the problem is when we select the convenience sampling, right? So although when we select the convenience sampling, the sample, we don't think about different factors here, no. We don't think about their abilities, we don't think about their capabilities, we don't think about their background, right? Only thing is the convenience, right? That is what we focus when it comes to convenience sampling. So it always go for the bias, right? It always link with the bias because the sample may not represent the large population. The reason is we always go for the persons who are ready to be available, who are readily available, and who are easy to be accessed. Right? So that would not be represent the large population. That is the problem when it comes to convenience sampling. And since the researcher use the convenience sampling as per its convenient, it would be like the personal bias, right? අපිට ලේසි කට්ටිය ටිකක් තමයි අපි තෝරගන්නේ. So that sample would not represent the entire population. So that is the problem we have. But the convenience sampling is the easiest and the quickest method. But there are drawbacks. And then we have the purposive sampling. So purposive sampling means, or we can call it as judgmental sampling as well. Purposive sampling and judgmental sampling both are same. So here what we do is researchers select the individuals based on some specific characteristics or based on some specific purpose, right? That purpose may be related to their research. So based on the specific purpose which related to the research, they can select an individual or they can select a sample, right? For an example, let's say you are studying a rare conditions. So you might, you might purposely select the individuals who have that condition, right? Let's say you are going to study a very rare health condition, right? So you might purposely select the individuals who have that rare health condition. That is purposive sampling. So this method is very useful and applicable when you study, when you are studying a very specialized group, but the sample may not represent the general population. That is the problem. But if you are going to study a very specialized group who are having very specialized requirement, and if you are having a very specialized purpose in your study, you can go for purposive sampling. But here also the problem is that selected individual, sometimes they may not represent your general population, right? That is the only drawback we have. Then we have the quota sampling again, another technique under non-probability sampling. So quota sampling is, we divide the population into subgroups here, right? So just like the stratified sampling, we divide the population into subgroups, but the difference is the selection of the participants with each group is non-random. In the stratified sampling, we select randomly. Here we non-randomly select. So the researcher, what the researcher do is, researchers select a specific number of individuals from each subgroups in order to meet their predetermined quota. Right? To meet their predetermined quota, they select a specific number from individual subgroups. Right? So I mean, they divide the big population into subgroup while having a look on certain characteristics. So then they select the specific number of individuals from each subgroup in order to meet the predetermined quota. So that is what they do under quota sampling, right? So in order to ensure that the certain characteristics are represent, but they doesn't ensure that the small is fully random here. So that is the difference when it comes to quota sampling. And I mean, that is the difference between quota sampling and the stratified sampling. But in both cases, we divide the population into subgroup based on the characteristics they have. And we have a snowball sampling technique as well. That is also, sorry. Under snowball sampling, I mean, there are some cases um, where the population is really difficult to access, right? There are some cases we are going to assess difficult situation, and in that case, the population is really difficult to access. Or when we study some hidden groups, like there are some specific social networks, no? Like when we are going to study the drug-related specific social network, the population is really difficult to access, right? අපිට direct drug deal කරන අයව access කරන්න බෑ. So there is a hidden group. So in that case, we can go for snowball sampling. If it is difficult to access the exact population, you can go for snowball sampling. So it usually starts with a very small number of people who meet the study criteria. And then what you do is, then those people refer to the researchers to others who fit their criteria or something, they can continue their study. So this method actually helps the researchers to locate the hard to reach individual. If they are having hard to reach individuals, but they can also introduce some bias as well. If the researcher is having hard to reach individuals like hidden research group, hidden population, they can go for snowball sampling, right? They can meet some study criteria. They can go for some small number of people while focusing on study criteria. Then again, they can refer to another people who are referring to those people, right? So on, we can select a small sample, right? In case of having hidden groups, especially if we are going to study, the population, we cannot directly get access. Like that is the best example. If we are going to study the drug dealing people, right? We can't directly go and ask questions from the drug dealers, right? So we have to have a discussion with some referees or something. We have to have a discussion with some, people who refer to those areas. and we have to get some answers for the particular questions and get some background knowledge and continue our research, right? Otherwise, we can't directly get the access for those people. So there are hidden groups. So in that case, we can use snowball sampling. So those are the non-probability sampling. I will try to share a document reference material regarding this probability sampling with examples, so then you can refer those as well. And if you refer to the research papers, you can again identify where they have applied these different sampling techniques, right? Now you have a assignment as well. You have an assignment, so in that case, you have to read the research papers, no, to write the literature review. So there also you can read, you can identify uh, which researchers have used what type of sampling techniques I mean, what are the areas they have applied, in which areas they have applied, which type of sampling techniques you have, you can identify, right? While reading different research papers and articles. Okay, so moving on to the most important one, the type of the research methodologies. So we can mainly categorize the research methodologies into two main parts, called qualitative and the quantitative studies. Right? These are the two main approaches in order to gather and in order to analyze the data. So that is qualitative and the quantitative research methodologies. So qualitative research means under qualitative research, we always try to understand the people's perception, their experiences, their behaviors, right? Especially the social phenomena in depth. We are trying to go in deep, right? And analyze their social phenomena under qualitative research, right? So it is a very inductive and it is a very descriptive study, right? It is not a numerical study. It is a very descriptive study. We don't deal with numbers here, right? Rather than just dealing with numerical data, we just deal with descriptive data when it comes to the qualitative study, right? So it is always it is good for open-ended questions, right? We don't use non-numerical, numerical data. We use non-numerical data. For an example, we use words, sounds, right? We deal with people, we directly observe their ideas, their perception, their experiences, right? Under qualitative studies. And the behaviors and the experiences are studied under qualitative study. And data collection usually is done by interviews, and the focus group discussions can be done, and the observational studies can be done as the data collection part, right, under qualitative study. So this type of qualitative research can be used when you want to explore a topic in depth. If you want to study a research topic in depth, and if you want to understand some motivation, some experiences, or if you need to generate the ideas for the future researchers based on the personal beliefs, personal motivational factors, and the experiences or behavioral aspects or something, you can go for qualitative study. It's a really descriptive one. Most of the time in social science related studies, we conduct these qualitative studies, right? I'm not saying like in other areas we don't conduct qualitative study. We do conduct, but most of the time in social science and most of the areas we conduct mixed method, right? Or quantitative, but qualitative study is also a very effective one in order to analyze it more in a descriptive and inductive manner, right? Especially in sociology and psychology, right? In psychological area, in psychology, we can't analyze the quantitative data, no? It should be a descriptive one. So in psychological aspect and in sociological aspect, we can apply this qualitative study. And then we have quantitative study, quantitative research methodology. That is another type. So it usually focuses on collecting and analyze the numerical data. So under quantitative study, as we are dealing with numbers and the numerical data, we can identify different patterns, right? The relationship between different factors, we can identify the trends, right? So correlations we can identify. So many more analytical part can be done under quantitative study, right? We can measure the variable under quantitative study, right? We can generalize our findings to a large population and we can add more value to our research through a quantitative study as well. So we can use the research instrument like the survey studies can be done, experimental studies can be done, and the statistical techniques, statistical testing can be done can be used as research instrument. And usually data we represent as numerical values, right? The percentage value, average data, correlation value, correlation coefficient value, right? Even though it is regarding the relationship, we show it as correlation coefficient value. Or even though it is regarding the spread of the data, we just show it using mean value, average value, or standard deviation or variance, or so on. We use mathematics and the statistic in order to represent the numerical data, analyze numerical data, right? It is more effective than giving more descriptive data, right? So, and especially when you are going to analyze the relationship between different variables, let's say factors affecting different, you have dependent and independent variables. No, if you are going to assess the relationship between dependent and independent variable, you can conduct a quantitative study and you can conduct a ANOVA or regression analysis, and you can identify a relationship. You can identify the most effective factor. You can identify the least effective factor, right? You can even you can develop a model as well. You can form a model, right? Referring to the statistical analysis, right? You using different statistical softwares. You can even define models as well to predict the future outcomes. You can define models, right? So that is the depth of this quantitative study. So when you want to test the hypothesis, right? Hypothesis analysis, and when you want to measure your variables, when you want to make some predictions based on the numerical data, you can conduct a quantitative research instead of qualitative one. So it is usually, commonly used in the fields like economics and the health science and the market research and the physical science related one. Quantitative study is a very common one. And apart from that, we have a mixed method, right? So in the middle part, you can see the mixed method is there. Mixed method means you can combine the qualitative and quantitative study. That is also an effective one, but it is little bit time consuming one. Consuming me, it takes more time to complete, right? Because you should focus on the descriptive part and the inductive part and the deductive part as well, right? So it takes more time for the analytical part and the data collection part. But if you have more than enough time, you can you can follow the mixed method as well. So at the end of the study, you can get a good outcome, right? So obviously the outcome would be great than following up the quantitative or qualitative. Through the mixed method, you can have a very good outcome at the end of the study. But the problem is the time, right? You have very limited time for a research. But if you are doing, let's say, if you are doing an individual study after the bachelor's or something, if you have more than enough time, you can practice mixed method. Using mixed method, you can do a good research, right? Okay. So moving on to the research methods, we have different type of research methods. We can conduct case studies, we can conduct observational studies, we can conduct cohort studies, we can conduct control studies, or else we can conduct experimental studies. So on, we have different research methods, right? That is methodology earlier we discussed. So under that, we have different research methods. right? You can either conduct case study analysis, observational study, cohort study, case control study. There are many more. I have stated 4 here. Experimental study, right? Um, cross-sectional study. Likewise, we have different research methods. So we will discuss them in detail. Mm. Shall we have a small break, please? 5 minutes. Then I will start the case study part. Okay, so moving on to the case study. Um, so, so moving on to the case study, that is actually a good research method which involves in-depth analysis and a very detailed examination of a specific individual or a specific group of people, a specific event or a specific situation. We are trying to conduct an in-depth detailed examination. So we select a very specific event, right? Not a big one, right? No, I mean, not multiple situation. We select a specific individual situation. We select a specific event and a specific situation, and we conduct an in-depth analysis and a detailed analysis. So that is what we do on a case study, right? We can select a specific factory location, and we can select a specific situation in that specific case in that plant, and we can examine it and give a solution. So basically, under case studies, it focuses on one subject actually, right? So for an example, a single person or a group or a single event and a single situation is focused when it comes to the case study, right? So that is what you need to remember. So, and also a very comprehensive understanding is trying to be gathered under case study analysis, case study method of that particular subject, and also we explore all relevant aspects that influence the situation, that influence the specific situation we selected, that influence the specific event we selected. So that is what we do on the case study, right? So you can find out many more case studies in Google Scholars or any other search engines as well. I will show you few. Once we complete this discussion, I will show you a few papers. And another thing is case studies usually rely on multiple sources of the data, right? That may be based on the interviews or observational studies or any documents or existing reports and documents or something. It relies on multiple sources of the data. So researchers usually analyze those type of different data in order to identify different patterns and the relationships, and especially to identify different insights as well, because this is an in-depth detailed examination regarding a specific single event or a situation. So to have a very deep insight, we should analyze multiple sources of the data. So we can collect them through different sources, and we have to analyze them in order to identify different relationship and the patterns and the insight. So usually in the case studies, we use both qualitative data and the quantitative data, right? Interviews and the narrative studies can be used, and also on the other hand, the numerical data and the statistical data can be used in order to support our findings when we conduct the case studies. So though the case studies focus on the the qualitative data, they can also include the quantitative data as well to strengthen our analysis, right? If we have the quantitative data, that means we can add more strength to our analytical part, right? Although we start with focusing on the qualitative data, we can add quantitative data as well to add more strength and add more validity for our analytical part, right? You can use the survey results, right? Performance metrics can be used. Some statistical measures can be used, which related to the subject area you have studied, right? So that can be done under case study. So in the engineering field, if we take an example, in the engineering field, you can analyze some specific engineering projects, right? You can analyze specific engineering process. You can analyze specific engineering systems, or one particular problem can be selected in a particular place, and you can conduct an in-depth examination, right? Under case study analysis. For an example, in the field of engineering, a case study might examine the design and implementation of a new bridge or let's say a resolution of a mechanical failure in a production line or something. A specific problem you can select, a specific case you can select, and you can conduct the in-depth examination. That is what we do on the case study method, right? It will always allow you, right? You means you as the researcher or engineers to study the real world application and real world problems and to understand the challenges which you face during your projects. And finally, to explore the solutions which you can implement and overcome those challenges in real world situations, you can use these case studies, right? For an example, an engineering case study might focus on how the construction company handle the challenges of building a construction, let's say how the challenges of building a um, sustainable energy efficient building, or else how the engineers solve the structural issues in a bridge design or something. You can select a specific problem, specific event, and conduct a case study analysis, right? So this shows some of the examples, very few examples of case study analysis. Modern driven engineering in a large industrial Motorola case study, and another case study example, the topic, right? Hydrogel design for cartilage tissue engineering. A case study with uh, I can't properly read this name as it. So the case studies, you can directly find out these type of things from Google Scholars or Scopus or any sites, right? I will show you few. So then although we are using different methods, we have positive and negative sides, right? The strength and the weaknesses are there. So strength of the case studies means it provide a very deep and very comprehensive understanding, because we are studying a individual situation and we are studying a single situation, very unique, specific group, specific situation. So as a result of that, we can have a comprehensive understanding and a very deep, in-depth analysis. So by focusing on one case, single case, researchers can capture very a full range of experiences, a full range of behavior, and also the factors that influence the subject. They can analyze more and more because of they are focusing on a single event, right? So this approach is useful to study very complex phenomena, right, that cannot be understood easily, that cannot be understood through surface level analysis. You can have this case study analysis, right, while focusing on that single event. And also because of having this in-depth nature in these case studies, it usually lead to have the discovery of the relationship, right? It gives you a chance to identify different patterns that may not have been immediately observed, right? So in some cases, we can't immediately observe, immediately identify the patterns. So as we are conducting a very in-depth analysis on the case studies, we can identify, we can discover the relationships and the patterns in the case study methods, right? A very thorough, very careful observation and the data collection is done on the case study methods. So it is a very good one to identify, to uncover the hidden connection between variables, right? To have a better understanding about how they interact in between each others, we can conduct a case study, right? And a new hypothesis development can be done, or some we can deal with more theories as well, right? And we can generate some new concepts as well through the case studies, because they allow the researchers to observe some real life situations, right, which can inspire the questions, which can inspire the ideas for the future research as well, while introducing new theories, new concepts, new hypotheses or something. right? Because they are dealing with a single situation. They put their full effort to study and have a full insight about a single unique situation. And on the other hand, there are weaknesses as well. Same as the strength, there are weaknesses. So unlike the experimental research, when it comes to the case studies, there are no any control groups, right? So in the case studies, it often lack of the control group for the comparison, right? To have a comparison, we don't usually have a control group here when it comes to case studies. So that will make it harder to draw a conclusion at the end of the day about the causes and the effect. So because without a control group, it is little bit difficult to rule out the factors, right, that maybe influence the outcome. We can't map out the factors without having a control group. So under case studies, we usually don't have a control group. And another thing is the validity, right? So internal validity refers to, how well the study measures what it intended to measure, no? So in the case study, um, the interaction uh, the interaction of the environmental and interaction of the personal characteristics can make it little bit difficult to establish and little bit difficult to form a direct cause and effect relationship. And also at the end of the day, that will make it a problem when it comes to the internal validity of the study. So the bias may be there when we conduct the research studies, the case studies. The selection bias will be there, right? So, I mean, when we select the group or the individual or the event to be studied, so that they may be subject to selection bias, right? So, although we are selecting a one particular individual situation or event to study under our research, usually it comes under personal bias, right? So where the chosen sample is not represent the entire large population or something. So it is, selection bias is there. That is another problem we have when it comes to the case study, right? So those are the few drawbacks, few weaknesses we have. The generalizability is also very limited when it comes to case studies, but this is also very good method. Although we are having weaknesses in each and every methods, we have strength and the weaknesses, right? Although they are having strength and the weaknesses, all of them are very good research methods, right? I can't say like this is better than this. All the methods are good, right? You can use any. But the thing is, strength and weaknesses are there. And then we have observational research. Observational research means, in observational research, researchers does not control, or he or she um, does not alter the environment or alter the variable of the subject. So instead of that, they simply observe and they simply record what happened naturally. Instead of controlling and altering the environment and the variables, right? Without doing that, they observe exactly what is happening in natural environment, right? That is what we mean by observational research study. Observational research method. We observe and we record the data, examining what is exactly happening, right? So this method actually allow us to, understand the exact behavior as we dealing with real world condition, as we are examining the real world conditions, right? We don't control anything, we don't manipulate anything, we don't alter anything in the environment. We study exactly what is happening in the real world condition, right? We observe it. ඇත්තටම මොකද්ද වෙන්නේ මේ working environment එකේ කියලා අපි observe කරනවා සහ observe කරලා අපි ඒක record කරලා analyze කරනවා. කිසිම දෙයක් වෙනස් කරන්නේ නැහැ. right? So that is really a good method, right? And also it relies on empirical method, right? Which means it is based on the real world, right? It is usually based on the real world and the observable data. It usually deal with the observable data. So researchers, when they collect the data, they systematically collect the data, right? They directly, through the direct observation, through the field note, they collect field note, they take video recordings, right? They, through the direct observations, they collect the data. That means systematically they collect the data because they need to take the real world data, right? Not the manipulated data. In real world condition, they should observe exactly what is happening. So to do that, the direct observation should be there. So they can refer to the daily diaries, the field notes, video recordings can be referred, right? While ensuring that the data is reliable and data is consistent, they can refer to the direct observation through that type of methods. So this observational research, through the observational research also we can identify the patterns and the association in between different variables as well, because since there is no any intervention, this observational research approach is really good, right? It is great for discovering the relationship that may exist naturally between the behavior, right? Naturally between behavior and the events or phenomena without having any external influences, right? We can identify the natural phenomena. That is the best thing we can gain through the observational study. So focus groups can be focused, right? Focus groups can be followed up under observational studies. So that those are one of the major form of the observational study, right? We form a small group of people and we observe them while discussing a particular a topic or a problem, and we are trying to understand their thoughts, right? It's a discussion regarding a particular topic, right? I hope you know about the focus group discussions. So we can have a focus group discussion and as a link to the observational research, and we can understand their ideas, their attitudes, their perceptions, their thoughts, right? Their beliefs, what they are expecting, right? What they are really performing, right? What about their performance? What they are expecting? And what about their perception on their work environment? Let's say you are going to assess the work environment. So what is their perception? What about their attitudes? What about their motivational factors? You can assess everything. You can understand everything through the focus group discussion, right? That is a good help for the observational study. So that method, you can collect answers for many more questions. You can ask how questions, you can ask what questions, you can ask why questions, and you can collect many more answers, right? That would be a base for your observational study. So you can collect a very deeper insight to your study through that people's feelings, and you can find out the reasons behind their behaviors, right? Through the observation studies, observational research methods, you can identify the person's behavior and you can find out the reasons for those behaviors as well through the focus group discussions. And other than that, under observational studies, again, you can use the pre-existing documents as well and the sources of the information like the official reports and the historical records, or if there are any published studies as well, you can refer anything as a part of the data collection process, right? Because you need to have a reliable documentation, a reliable data collection part to support your observation and to give some additional context or additional background to your study and your research. So you can refer those type of sources of the information as well as a base for your observational study. Here I have again stated the strength and the weakness of observational study as well. So one of the major strength of the observational study is you can come up to come some direct outcome from the participants' natural behavior, right? I told you that we examine the, the new natural situation or exact conditions we are assessing here. So the data comes directly from the participants' natural behavior here and also their natural actions. So that means their own perspectives and their own understanding, their own behaviors will be explained to your study. So that is a good benefit, right? That is a strength actually you have under observational study, right? Because you are explaining real world experiences. So that would be better than just manipulating something, than just controlling the environment and find something, right? So instead of doing that, if you can observe exactly what is happening and if you can give a solution for that, so that would be better. And observation research is excellent when you want to study a small number of cases in great details, because it allow you for a very deep and very dive uh, and very in depth complex analysis, right? To go into deep analysis, right? Go dive into the complex phenomena and to have a very deep insight compared to the large scale quantitative and qualitative studies. You can have a observation study as well, because it helps the researchers to gain a deep understanding about how the people experience in certain phenomena, right? Rather than just looking at the numbers and broad trends, observational research studies can offer very descriptive view of the participants' real experiences. So that would be practical and that would be beneficial for the researchers to develop some psychological and sociological and education related outcome at the end of their study. And the weaknesses are um, the knowledge. The problem is the knowledge produced through the observational research that might not be applicable to the other people or the other settings. Right? That is one of the major weakness we have, because since the study typically focus on a small number of participants or a specific context, that results you find out at the end of the observation study that may not be easily generalizable to the broader population. That is the major problem, major weakness we have, right? And another thing is under observational research method, that is actually primarily qualitative one, so it is not suitable for making very broad quantitative predictions, right? So usually the qualitative uh, base can be developed, but it is little bit difficult to develop a quantitative prediction under observational study. And because we are observing the behaviors and the experience now, so that insight we can't easily convert them to the quantitative predictions. So that is another weakness we have. And here also that bias case is there, right? The personal bias is there, that the results you are finding out that will be biased on the researchers' personal opinions, right? So personal bias is another weakness, um, because the interpretation part and because the researcher, I mean, since the observational research involves some subjective interpretation of the data, there is a little risk that the researcher's personal bias may influence how they observe it and how they interpret the behavior and the phenomena. right? So that can be affect the reliability and the objectivity of the findings. So that is another weakness of this method, right? And this is another method called cohort study. So a cohort study means a group of people over time examining the relationship between exposure to certain factor and the development of a particular outcome or a condition. So in cohort study, what the researcher do is researchers select a group, let's say group of individuals who do not yet have the outcome or yet have the interest. For an example, let's say specific disease or maybe specific conditions or specific behavior or something, specific conditions or something. Over time, all over the time, they examine it in order to identify the relationship and also the certain factors, and time to time they continue their study. Right? It takes more time to complete this cohort study. Sometimes even it takes more than 20 to 30 years. Right? We can't complete a cohort study within 6 months or 1 year period. Right? Sometimes it takes more than 20 years or 50 years. Right? It depends on the requirements of the study. Right? So the individuals, they follow over the study over time, and in order to see who developed the condition at the end of the study. Sometimes the initial starting person will not be there once the ending person find out and develop the condition. Right? So it takes more time to complete this cohort study. But the benefit is, through the cohort study, the reliability is high compared to the other studies. Right? We can get a good outcome and a reliable, consistent outcome at the end of this cohort study compared to the other studies we have. Right? Throughout this cohort study, participants are interviewed and participants are observed to in order to determine whether they have certain exposure, certain risk, and certain characteristics or something, right? That could be include their lifestyle factors. For an example, let's say you are going to introduce, let's say in medical field, they are going to introduce a new medicine, right? Introducing a new medicine, it is not a easy one. It takes more years to analyze the factors, analyze the side effects, and do the testing and introduce it to a market. So it takes more time, especially when it comes to medical related things. So they can conduct lifestyle, they can assess the lifestyle factors like the smoking, dieting, everything, environmental factors or medical conditions, even they can start a study, right? So that might influence the likelihood of developing the outcome. They can study many more factors time to time in order to develop that condition. Right? So it takes more time to study it and to develop the exact outcome. So that is what we do on a cohort study. So cohort study can be, that is divided into a group based on the whether or not they have been exposed or to a particular risk factor or not, right? Researchers can compare their frequency and their incidence and their frequency of the outcome, right? And they can categorize, actually. This cohort study can be categorized. So since this goes over very long period of time, we should the tracking the participants also will be a little bit difficult, right? The design help to a good design should be there, because the design help the researchers to observe how exposure, how characteristics affect the development of the outcome over time. So that will be helpful for the researchers to understand the causes and the effect relationship, because they are continuing the study for a long period of time, right? So when it comes to these cohort studies, we can identify two parts. For an example, retrospective cohort study and prospective cohort study. You can see here, if you have a look on the past, if you look back and continue the cohort study, we call it as retrospective cohort study. And if you look ahead and if you look future and if you continue the cohort study, we call it as prospective cohort study. Those are the two major categories under cohort study. Right, so in this retrospective cohort studies, what the researcher do is the researcher look back in the time and they use the existing records and existing data, that may be the medical records, the historical data, or whatever the existing data, existing records they refer, in order to identify a group of individuals who have been exposed and who have been, diagnosed or exposed to a particular risk factors in the past or something. They analyze the historical data and continue the study. So the outcome of the interest is then assessed based on the historical data. So that is what we mean by retrospective cohort study. We look back and continue the cohort study. Right? Researchers examine the outcomes in the group of individuals who have already been exposed to that risk factors in the past. Right? We identify the individuals who have experienced the outcome in the past. So, for an example, that may be a disease. Right? You can have a look on the past. Right? You can look back and you can identify the individuals who have already experienced the disease and have experienced the outcome, and then continue the cohort study. Right? So that is what we mean by retrospective cohort study. And then the next one is the prospective cohort study. So in prospective cohort study, we look ahead and we continue. Right? We don't look back, we look ahead and we continue it in future. Right? So researchers can select a group of individuals and they can follow them over time. They can collect the data as, time to time, and they can study. So that future study track the participant from the present onward and observe how their exposure, how their lifestyle, how their environmental factors impact to the development of the particular outcome. That is what we do on a prospective cohort study. But in the retrospective cohort studies, we don't do like that. That individuals we have selected, they have already experienced that outcome, right? කියන්නේ ඒ තියෙන disease එක කියලා ගමුකෝ, මොකක් හරි disease එකක් නම් අපි තෝරගත්ත individualsලා already ඒකේ තියෙන outcome එක experience කරලා ඉවරයි. අපි එයාලගේ historical data ටික අපි cancer එකක් කියලා ගමුකෝ, ඒවා experience කරලා ඉවරයි. ඒකෙන් තියෙන outcome එක experience කරලා ඉවරයි ඒගොල්ලෝ. එයාලව study කරලා අපේ study එක continue කරන්නත් පුළුවන්. right? ඒ කියන්නේ already ඒකේ තියෙන outcome, ඒ particular outcome එක, ඒ factors, ඒකේ තියෙන risk එක, ඒ හැමදේම experience කරපු group එකක් study කරලා historical data study කරලා අපිට cohort study එක continue කරන්න පුළුවන්. ඒක තමයි retrospective කියන්නේ. prospective වෙනකොට cohort study එකක් කියන්නේ අපි historical data නෙමෙයි. අපි ඉස්සරහට, ඒ කියන්නේ අපි study group එකක් තෝරගෙන අපි එයාලගේ lifestyle එක, factors, ඒ වගේ තියෙන exposure එක identify කරගන්නවා කොහොමද ඒ වගේන් තියෙන impact එක. ඒ particular outcome එක අපි හිතන outcome එකෙන් එයාලගේ තියෙන lifestyle වල, ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ තියෙන environmental factors වල, එයාලගේ behaviors වල, එයාලගේ attitudes වල, එයාලගේ health behaviors වල තියෙන impact එක කොහොමද අර outcome එක develop වෙන්නේ කියලා අපි study කරන එක future aspect එකක්. right? ඒක තමයි මේ දෙකේ difference එක. එහෙමත් අපිට පුළුවන් cohort study එකක් continue කරන්න. ඒ මොකක් කරත් ටිකක් time consuming study එකක් තමයි cohort study එකක් කියන්නේ. right? So we can identify many more root causes under cohort study. right? Because we can look at the problem in many angles, and once you study the causes, again you can identify different problem based on the causes you identify. So this is like never ending study, right? So you can identify many more research areas under cohort study, right? You can develop different conditions, right, associated with your study under cohort study, right? You can collect different data. You can analyze the data in different angle. You can assess the individuals in different way, right, under cohort study. But it is a time consuming one and it is a expensive one. You have to spend more time, you have to spend more money. It is an expensive one because it requires long time to follow up, right? That process is also complex. You have to follow up it all over the time for a long time period, and it is an expensive one. um, the researchers must actively track the data over months and over years. So it is not an easy task. So as undergraduate students, you can't practically do a cohort study as your undergraduate project, right? But case study, observational study, experimental study, case control studies, you can do. Cohort study, practically you can't do because you only have maximum 5 to 6 months for your research study, right? Maximum 6 months you have for your final research. So you don't have enough time to continue this cohort study, right? But it is good to have this knowledge of these cohort studies, right? So the same benefits and the strength, the strength and the weaknesses I have stated here. So you can read it out. And case control studies is there. That is another research method. So here what we do is, this is also a very retrospective study. We are trying to identify the factors that may have contributed to the development of a condition or a let's say a disease, right? So we analyze the data from the past, and we use the records, or we conduct interview in order to gather the information about the outcome and about the exposure as well under case control study. So in a case control study, we have two groups, right? We can identify two groups, case and the control. Case group and the control group. So cases means those are the individuals who have the condition. Or if it is regarding a disease, cases means those are the individuals who have the disease that you are going to study, right? Those are the individuals who have the conditions and being studied. And control mean those are the individuals who do not have the conditions, and they are similar to the cases in the areas, other characteristics, right? They don't have that disease or that condition, but the similar characteristics are there. For an example, age, gender, or any other relevant factors are there, but they don't have the particular condition or the disease. So that is the controlling group. They don't have the disease. So you can compare those case and the control group here. But then you say under data analytic part in the case control study, so data in the case control study can be collected through the direct interviews can be conducted, and some questionnaires or chart interviews, right? Chart reviews can be conducted. You can ask the participants about their history of exposure to the risk factors, and you can ask the participants to fill out the surveys, right? Online surveys related to their health related issues or lifestyles or any exposures or something, right? Even you can review the existing medical records or any other records as well in order to identify the relationship between the cases and the controlling groups, right? So, again, I have stated the strength and the weaknesses here. So, under strength of the case control study, they are very, cost effective and very quick method. And because they don't require following the participants over a long time period. So it is a cost effective and effective method. And you can even study the condition, very rare conditions as well, rare diseases, rare conditions can be studied. And here the major problem is also there is a risk of being personal bias. That is the only problem here, major problem here. And the control group, sometimes that may not always be perfectly matched to the case group. So that is another problem we have. So likewise, we have some weaknesses as well, right? So that is about the different research methods. So moving on to the qualitative studies, right? So we discussed about the qualitative and the quantitative studies. So anyways, I have added some in detail slides as well regarding qualitative and quantitative studies, but we have already discussed them. So if I simply go through them, you can read these slides. So if I go through them, qualitative studies, we focus on understanding the human experiences, right? So to identify their behaviors, perceptions, or something. Unlike the quantitative research, which deal with the numbers and measurable data, when it comes to qualitative research, we look at some narrative information, right? We explore the topics under very less structured conditions, right? A narrative, very descriptive informations are going to be analyzed under qualitative study, right? We concern with the narrative information, like experiences and the perceptions of the people, right? The detailed descriptions are added under qualitative study, not the numerical analytic. And the group discussions can be focused. One-to-one discussions can be conducted, right? The observational studies can be done in order to gain very deep insight into the selected subjected areas and subjected experiences. Rather than just gathering the numerical data, we can have a very descriptive, very narrative, analytical part when it comes to the qualitative study, right? Under quantitative studies, always we are trying to measure the data, no? Always we are trying to measure the variables. But unlike that quantitative study, when it comes to qualitative one, we always ask how and why questions, right? For an example, we ask, how do the people perceive certain events, right? We always try to find out the answers for why do these individuals behave like this in different situations, right? So under qualitative studies, we always try to find out the answers for how and why questions, right? It is very descriptive one, very narrative one, right? Quantitative measures are not there. We use the numerical values. Numbers we use just to categorize the variable, just to categorize some categorical variables, just to categorize the data under categorical variables, we can use the numbers. But we don't do any numerical analytical part here, right? So interviews can be conducted, as I earlier told you, right? One-to-one conversations can be done where the researchers ask open-ended questions in order to explore the participants' experiences, their thoughts and the feelings, right? For an example, an interview could explore how someone feel about the recent job change, or an interview can explore how someone feel about their experiences with particular customer service or something, Likewise, you can have a one-to-one conversation with the participants, and the observational study can be done, right? You can watch the people in their natural setting in order to understand their behavior and the interaction as well. That is another way of gathering the data. You can observe how the, let's say, how the students interact during the group projects, right? In order to, give some insight into the teamwork and teamwork dynamics, you can assess how they interact during the group projects, right? And you can observe how the students communicate in between the team members in their group projects. So on, you can conduct observational studies. And the document analytical part as well, you can do some social media analysis, letters, reports, right? Some existing reports you can analyze in order to have some data analytical part. Here actually we conducted very thematic analysis. Under qualitative study, we conducted thematic analysis because we don't deal with the data, right? It is a very descriptive study. So thematic, very informative analytical part is done. And moving on to the quantitative research, so as we earlier discussed, we always collect and analyze the data using numerical measurement, right? We focus on quantifying the outcome. We always try to quantify and measure the outcome, right? To identify the relationship, to identify the patterns and give some answers for the research questions, right? To control different standards and different conditions, to identify different patterns, correlation coefficient. So whatever the things we are going to understand here under quantitative studies, quantifying the outcome, measuring the outcome. So those are the numerical measurements, right? So we measure the outcomes using numerical data, numerical values under quantitative study, right? So you can count it, right? You can have percentage values, scores, you can have numerical data points, you can have, right? You can conduct a comparison table, you can establish some patterns, you can have a some graphical representations as well. You can draw conclusion based on the numerical values you have, right? And in quantitative research, the data is usually collected under a very standardized and controlled condition. In order to collect a very reliable and very valid data, you use a very standardized and controlled condition, right? To ensure the consistency, you use a standardized method to collect the data and to analyze the data. And in these quantitative research methods, you can conduct the experimental research designs as well, right? Quantitative research, usually it involves in experimental research design. So in that case, researchers usually manipulate one variable in order to observe their effect on another variable, right? So that is the relationship between independent and dependent variable, right? Under experimental study, what the researcher can do is, researcher manipulate one variable in order to identify the effect on the another variable, right? Or to identify the relationship between dependent and the independent variable. So it will be very helpful for the researcher to establish a cause and effect relationship between dependent and independent variable, right? Under experimental research design linked with the quantitative study. So that is really good research work that you can do as a physical science student. So, other than that, the patterns can be identified, the relationship. You can even generalize your findings to a very large population through the numerical analytical part or quantitative study, right? The statistical analysis is usually done under quantitative study. You draw very objective conclusion that are not influenced by your personal opinion. But when we are conducting a descriptive study, sometimes there is a little risk, right? There is a little risk of goes for personal bias. But if we are doing a statistical analysis under quantitative study, it is not influenced by the personal opinions or personal bias, right? And under quantitative study, we may use different types of data, right? The independent variables and the dependent variables can be used. And types of data and types of variables are there. So types of variables, under types of variables, we have independent and dependent variable. And types of data means those are the, how you can classify your different types of data, whether you have nominal data, whether you have categorical data, whether you have ratio data, whether you have interval related data, whether you have ordinal data. So likewise, you can categorize your data type, right? And specially, right, other than that, specially, you should identify the type of the data. That is the most important part, the independent and the dependent variable. So that is the most important part when it comes to variable analysis. Independent variable or IV, independent variable means the variable that the researcher manipulate or researcher change in order to observe their effect on the dependent variable. Independent variable, that is the variable researcher can manipulate or researcher can change. And then we have the dependent variable. So dependent variable means that is the variable which is affected by the independent variable. Right? Right? That dependent variable means that is one of the variable affected by the independent variable. It depends on the independent variable. And dependent variable cannot be manipulated by the researcher. Right? So then once you identify these independent and dependent variables, once you do the analytical part, you can even identify you can test the relationship between these two concepts, different concepts. You can even identify the variables affecting each other, right? You can draw a very good conclusion about the cause and effect relationship through the correlation coefficient analysis, right? So independent, if we have a look on the independent variable, right? And also you can again call it as predictor variable, right? Independent variable, or else you can call it as predictor variable, or else you can call it as explanatory variable. All are same. Independent, predictor variable, explanatory variable. So that is the variable which we can manipulate it and which we can control. Right, in a experiment, in order to observe their effect on another variable. Another variable means dependent variable, right? To observe the effect on another variable, we can control, we can change, we can manipulate that independent variable, right? So remember that independent variable can be controlled by the researchers. So researchers has the authority and they has the ability to change or control that independent variable. Right? Independent variables, their values are not affected by the other values, right? In the study. Although the researcher can manipulate or change the independent variable values are not affected by the other variable. Independent variable එකේ value එක කිසිම වෙලාවක අනිත් value වෙනස් කරා කියලා වෙනස් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඒක independent. හැබැයි researcher කෙනෙක් ඔය independent dependent ඒවා අතර තියෙන relationship එක effect එක බලන්න වෙනස් කරන්න manipulate කරන්න independent variable. අපි independent variable එක change කර කර තමයි ඒකෙන් තියෙන effect එක dependent variable එකට තියෙන effect එක check කරන්නේ. හැබැයි කිසිම වෙලාවක මොන variable එක වෙනස් කරත් independent variable එකට ඒකෙන් බලපෑමක් නැහැ. අපිට independent variable එක වෙනස් කර කර ඒකෙන් තියෙන effect එක check කරන්න පුළුවන්. හැබැයි dependent variable එකක් වෙනස් කරා කියලා independent variable එකක් වෙනස් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. Right? Usually අපි dependent variable එකක් වෙනස් කරන්නේ නැහැ. Independent variable එක වෙනස් කරොත් dependent variable එකට තියෙන effect එක check කරන්න පුළුවන්. හැබැයි වෙන variable එක අපි හිතමු අපිට independent variables 3-4ක් තියෙනවා. right අපිට independent variables 3ක් තියෙනවා. එක independent variable එකක value එක වෙනස් කරා කියලා second independent variable එකට ඒකෙන් කිසිම effect එකක් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. හැබැයි ඔයාලා independent variable manipulate කරන්න ඒක dependent variable එකට බලපාන්න පුළුවන්. right හැම වෙලේම research එකකදී independent variable එක තමයි change කරන්නේ. researcher හැම වෙලේම යාට පුළුවන් independent variable එක control කර ඒකෙන් dependent variable එකට තියෙන effect එක check කරන්න. right for an example, let's say you are going to do a experiment in order to test the effect of let's say different study time on a test score. So independent variable would be the study time, right? Because the researcher can control how much time the participant spending on their study. So changing on the study time, right? That would be the independent variable. You can change, you can manipulate it, no? Changing on the study time, you can you can check the test scores of each and every individuals, right? And when it comes to independent variables, the dependent variable, we can't manipulate it, right? The major thing is we can't manipulate it. So, so this is the variable that is measure or that is observed to see how it is influenced by the independent variable. Right? We can check whether how it is influenced by the independent variable while assessing the dependent variable. So usually the dependent variable is expected to change or expected to change based on the manipulations of the independent variable. But we don't manipulate or we don't change the dependent variable. We change the independent variable and we just have a look on the dependent variable and check whether it will be affected or not. Right? So dependent variable represent the effect or the outcome that results from the changes in the independent variable. So that is what we can assess. So as per the example I told you, in the study time, right? If we study of the study time and the test score, so that study time is the independent variable. Now we can change the study time and check the test score, whether there is any changes or not. So the dependent variable would be test score because they are influenced by the independent variable, right? So likewise, you can check whether, okay, what is the dependent variable in your study and what are the independent variable in your study. So for your study, for a single study, there may be one dependent variable, or on the other hand, you may have more than, let's say, sometimes we may have 10 to 15 independent variables. Right? We can have number of independent variables because we are trying to identify the relationship between dependent and independent variables. Right? Even though at the end of the study, we can identify, okay, out of these, let's say we are having, initially we have 10 independent variables and 1 dependent variable. And we are trying to assess the relationship between those independent and dependent variables. And after the study, we can check whether, okay, what is the most effective factor and what is the least effective factor, and what about the percentages, what about the correlation coefficient of those factors, what is the relationship in between these factors. Everything we can assess, right? That is the benefit of this statistical analysis when it comes to physical science studies, right? Then we can conduct the experimental research designs as well, right? That is the fundamental approach in order to understand the cause and effect relationship, right? Especially in the physical sciences related studies, we conduct experimental research designs. Researchers can actively manipulate one or more variable in order to observe how changes affect the other variables. So it will allow to develop a very clear conclusion about the causes and the effect. So this is a very systematic and scientific approach You can manipulate the variables, right? So researchers can change one or more variables. That variables mean independent variables, right? And then you can observe how they affect the other variables, other dependent variables as well. So, in addition to the manipulation of the variables, the researchers can control the external factors as well. There are some controllable variables in the external environment. You can even control the external factors in order to ensure that the results are only due to the manipulated independent variables and not the other factors. To ensure that one, you can control the external factors, right? And cause and effect relationship can be identified through the experimental researchers. And the major thing is the independent variables, dependent variables can be identified, and the controllable variables are there. We can identify them and we can control them, right? So when it comes to engineering aspect, so usually the engineers use the experimental research studies to test different hypotheses, right? To solve the real world problems. For an example, to improve some high efficiency machineries and to reduce some energy consumption, to enhance the safety features of the products or so on, you can conduct some experimental research. And that will be helpful for the engineers to test the new materials and the technologies as well, right? Even in their designing part, you can use the experimental research design to test your materials and the technologies and the concepts in different various conditions. So the prototype testing, like the new product development, everything can be tested through the experimental design. So if an engineer is developing a, let's say, new machinery or new engine or something, they, they can manipulate different variables, like they can manipulate the fuel type, they can manipulate the engine temperature, right? They can manipulate the, let's say, the pressure settings, right? I don't know I have no, I don't know have the technical knowledge of your technical terms, right? You can manipulate the fuel types or any pressure settings as well to see how how those changes affect the engine efficiency or something. The engineering aspect can be assessed through the experimental study, right? So, and you can test the prototype because before moving to the full scale production, you can test the prototype as well under experimental research design, right? You as engineers, you can create prototype of your new design, new machines and new devices, and you can use the experimental methods to evaluate their performance under different conditions. You can manipulate different variables and you can test the performance under different conditions, right? So that is also an experimental study you can do. So, okay. So, same as I earlier explained, so manipulations can be done and the controlling part and the randomization. So those are the main thing that link with the experimental research type. And especially, we have three different testing type, right? Three different testing designs, research design called post-test only control group design, pre-test post-test control group design, and Solomon 4 group design, right? Um, so I will discuss those three in next week. So I will show you a few research papers. So I have added 4 papers here. Let me show you the papers. Hope you can see my screen. This is I downloaded from Google Scholar actually, just to show you the experimental studies. And right, I will upload them on LMS, so you can refer it, and the observational studies are there. You can search them through the keywords, right? And the cohort study, this is a prospective cohort study based on the COVID-19. And this is a case study. Most of the time we conduct case studies. So this is a small example for a case study. So I just wanted to show you. So I will upload these 4 papers as well on LMS. So then you can just go through them. And I also uploaded few papers, and also I'll share the literature review assignment as well. I think, as I remember, you have till 15th of May, as if I'm correct. Till 15th of May, you have, that means you have more than enough time to complete your literature review. And also I will share another activity regarding the abstract writing, because we don't have enough time to do some in-class activities. So I will share a take-home activity as well. I will upload it on LMS. So I will share a paper, right? Like this, I will share a paper. I will remove the abstract part. And what you have to do is just give a try to develop the abstract while reading the research paper. I will find a research paper, good research paper, and I will upload it on LMS. So read the paper and try to develop a small abstract while including the major, the aim and the purpose and the major findings and a very brief conclusion, right? Try to develop a conclusion for that paper. So I will share these materials as well. So if I go back, today we had a look on the limitations of the scientific method and the research designing, and we discussed the key characteristics of scientific methods and the probability sampling and non-probability sampling we discussed, and 4 techniques under each sampling, probability and non-probability sampling we discuss. So under probability sampling, simpler, random, stratified, systematic and clustered sampling we identified. And under non-probability sampling, sorry, convenience, purposive, quota sampling and snowball sampling was discussed. I will try to share a small document regarding these type of sampling technique as well. Time to time, I will share few, reference material, because we have very limited time. Only 8 weeks are there for this semester. So I will try to share as much as possible. I mean, the reference materials as much as possible. So you can, at least you can refer it when you start your research. And then we discuss about the qualitative and the quantitative studies, and few research methods we discuss: case studies and the observational studies, cohort studies, and the case control studies as well. Then we had a look on the qualitative research method and the quantitative study. And we discuss about the variables, independent and dependent variables. Yes. So we have a very small part, so I will discuss it by next week, since we don't have enough time. I will stop now. So any questions up to this point? I have added the links as well. You can download it. So anyways, I will upload them on LMS. Or else you can download it. I have mentioned the links here. I will upload the lecture materials as well. All the previous lecture materials had already been uploaded on LMS. Any questions up to this point? You can now start your literature review assignment. Don't wait until last minute, right? And I wanted to show you the formattings as well, but I will try to show you by next week. because I know that you know something about the formatting, but the problem is in your final research report, there are so many formatting errors. So I just need to correct it before you start your final research. And yes, so that is all about the things I need to discuss today. Any questions up to this point? Okay, so if you don't have any questions, we can wrap up the session for today. And thank you very much for joining. See you on next day. Have a nice day. Thank you.